Welcome to episode number 134. I'm in a closet, in my new apartment, in my new city, and during a year that's been like no other, this podcast episode will be like no other. Hit it.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Well, hello, my friends. It is true. I'm sitting on the floor in a closet. I have no idea what the audio quality of this podcast will be, but I am doing a very different show this episode because my best laid plans for this show fell through at the last minute. And because I've had quite a whirlwind life over the last 3 months, really most intensively over the last 3 months, but really over the last 6 months, I didn't have anything in the bank. And so I was really faced with this decision. Well, first I was panicked and stressed out because my guest was not able to do a recording with me. I will have this guest on in the future. Unfortunately, my guest contracted an illness and was not able to be with me, but no worries. You will still learn and hear from this guest in the future. But I panicked because I didn't have anything in the bank to release to you guys. And that has never happened to me. Since the inception and the beginning of this podcast back in 2016, I have never, ever missed an episode. I've never delayed a date of release. I have been spot on. And last night I was like, oh my gosh, I really think I have to skip an episode, which was killing me. And long story short, or I am going to get into a longer story here, but I just thought I was not going to do this podcast. I didn't have anything. I didn't want to just throw out some, last minute, poorly planned episode just to stay on track. But you know what's so funny? This is has been such a funny year. And my daughter, who just recently moved into New York City, had come home for a day. She had a doctor's appointment, so she came home the day before and spent the night and had dinner with us. And I was taking her to the train station to catch a train back to the city, and I was literally right in the midst of this whole, oh my gosh, my guest can't come. What am I going to do? I'll just skip an episode. But because I only release every 2 weeks, I realized that this was going to be a 4-week gap, and I didn't really feel good about that. And my daughter, she was so great. She was like, Mom, why don't you just talk about how you got started in your career and talk about what motivates you about childhood nutrition and what's inspired you over the years and how things have changed. And she's like, you just tell people when you do the show that this is the Jill Castle show. It's a special episode that has, nothing to do really with a specific topic in childhood nutrition, but it's just an episode talking about how you got to where you are today. And so she inspired me in the moment when I was super indecisive and very stressed about it. And she just inspired me to go down this path. And so here I am. I'm sitting in a closet that is about 3 by 3, probably smaller. I have no idea on measurements. But this closet is in my brand new apartment in a brand new city because today, as I record this, we closed on our home in Connecticut and have decided to split our lives, our time between a place up in Massachusetts that we decided to buy for the next 40, 50 years, however long we're going to live. That's where we're going to be. That's where the grandchildren will come. But we also have this apartment in Connecticut near the town that we used to live in so that my husband, who still works in New York City, can get into the city, and our children who live in New York City can still see us easily. And so I'm in a phase of life where I'm flitting and flooding back and forth between 2 different places. I'm starting over, literally, in so many ways, and trying to adapt and adjust to this new lifestyle. And it's not been easy, but it has been fun and certainly different. So before my legs completely fall asleep and my hips get locked in place in this weird pretzel-like angle I'm sitting in, I thought I would share with you sort of how I got here, literally and figuratively. I think a little bit the literal part of it, but I thought maybe I'd take you down the Jill Castle journey for kicks and giggles. Maybe you know these things about me. Maybe there's some things that you don't know about me. But I thought I would just sort of run through my life history as a dietitian and throw in some tidbits of what I've learned along the way. So my family of origin, I was born and raised in Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, in fact, and I went to college at Indiana University in Bloomington. But my family of origin, I am the oldest of 4 kids. I'm the oldest daughter. There are 3 girls and 1 boy in my original family. And my parents are both in Indiana, but they're divorced. They got divorced when I was 19, when I was in college. And yeah, that was hard. That was definitely one of those life-altering events that we all have them. That was one for me. And probably was a huge motivator for me when I graduated to decide to move to the East Coast and start a career in my life, really, in Massachusetts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What I wanted to tell you about my family of origin was who inspired me to get into the field of nutrition. And I've talked about my mother over the episodes here and there. She was a fantastic cook. She loved to experiment with new recipes. But it was my dad who really was the inspiration for my entry into my first nutrition class. And that was because I went into college as a pre-med student with the intent of going to medical school. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a doctor. And I loved chemistry. I loved inorganic chemistry because it was all numbers and crunching and very black and white. But by the time I got to organic chemistry, that really kind of sealed the deal for me and made it very apparent that getting to medical school with the grades that I was getting in organic chemistry was highly unlikely. And so I took a pause the second semester of my sophomore year to figure out what I wanted to do, because I had it in my head for so long that I was going to go to med school and be a doctor that I didn't really have an alternative path. I hadn't thought of anything else. And so my second semester of my sophomore year, I decided to just take a whole bunch of different classes. I took an economics class, I took a nutrition class, I took a psychology class, and it was my dad who really I wasn't even going to take a nutrition class, but my dad was like, Jill, nutrition is the wave of the future. It really is going to play a big role. I think you should take a basic nutrition class. If you don't like it, that's fine. You'll still have so much good information that you can use for yourself personally. So I enrolled in Nutrition 101, and it was a class of about 300 or 400 students. It was a huge class, and I loved it. I loved that class, and it really clicked for me. And so I decided to change my major to nutrition, and it ended up that my college experience was a 4.5-year college experience with 3 summer sessions built in over the years to make up for the classes that I hadn't taken into that major. So I graduated after a 4.5-year stint at Indiana, and I got into an internship and all that good stuff. But here's how I got into the internship. For those of you out there that might even be interested in nutrition and how do you get an internship? The summer after my junior year, I had decided to come and spend the summer in Boston with my best friend who was from the Boston area. And she and I decided that we would live in the city of Boston and work 2 jobs in order to pay for our rent. And so I was able to get a job at Mass General Hospital as a nutrition assistant. And I was very strategic in that I wasn't going to get a quote-unquote internship as a nutrition person, but I knew that I could position myself in a job that would give me hands-on experience and would really give me a taste of what it would be like to be a dietitian. It would allow me to work alongside dietitians and see if that was the kind of work I wanted to do. And so I got a job as a nutrition assistant, which at the time, that job title meant that I corrected menus and I passed trays. So I passed breakfast, lunch, and dinner trays, collected the trays, took them down to the kitchen for cleaning. I would collect patient menus and I would correct the menus, and they were paper menus. So if a person was on a diabetic diet, I corrected their food choices. I tried to always allow them to have the things that they wanted, but if there were things that, they couldn't have, for example, back in those days, we did not let people on a diabetic diet have sweet desserts. Now, the philosophy and the management of diabetes has completely changed since then. But back then, if somebody circled a brownie on their menu, I crossed it off and I substituted with sugar-free Jell-O or a fruit cup. That's just how we did it. But anyways, I digress a little bit, but I did that nutrition assistant job and it was a wonderful experience. But here was my day. My nutrition assistant job at Mass General went from 7:30 in the morning to 4:30 p.m. And I was paid, so that income either was, went in the bank for saving for the next school year for me, or it was covering my rent. I can't remember which job covered which. But then after 4:30, I would literally from Mass General, I would walk up the hill to Government Square, where I had my second job at the Purple Shamrock, which was a bar, Irish bar, and I had the 5 p.m. to midnight shift. Now, I worked my butt off that summer, as you can imagine. 2 full-time jobs, 1 full-time job paid for the rent, and 1 full-time job, the income went into the bank. That is the summer, I swear, that I got bunions because I was on my feet all day long. And I took the subway and I walked to my apartment, from the subway to and fro to work. I walked everywhere or I took the subway. So that was, I guess, that was my first introduction into really hard work, like hard work, working long days, being on for long periods of time, being social, either with patients or with customers at the restaurant/bar. I mean, I gained a lot of skills through that experience. Money management skills, people skills. I learned a lot about nutrition. I learned about, what it meant and what it felt like to work in a hospital. And after that, I went back for my senior year, finished up my senior year. That summer afterwards, I got another internship in nutrition. I went to Colorado and worked with the Denver Broncos training camp. And that was a whole different area of nutrition. It gave me a whole different perspective. That was the first time I ever saw collard greens. It was the first time I ever saw all this fried food. I wasn't raised on food like that, didn't see that a lot in Indiana. So I was getting introduced to a whole new way of eating, a whole new diet, a whole new group of foods that I'd never experienced before. Plus these athletes that were, back then, really big football players. It was before, the time where football players are lean, mean machines. These guys were big guys and they were eating a lot of food. And the dietitian who was in charge of their meal planning was, really serving up a lot of calories for these guys. So that was a great experience as well. After I graduated from Indiana, I got my internship at Mass General Hospital. And that was great. That was a great year. I met some of my closest friends who I still stay in contact. I had a mentor who is a close friend and I'm still in touch with. I still see my first boss, Susan Laramie. I see her at fancy conferences and nutrition conferences. A lot of people in my world in those days that I worked in my younger years of working in Boston are still in my life in some way, shape, or form today. So I did my internship at Mass General and then they hired me in pediatrics. I did a 2-week pediatric rotation during my internship and that's when I knew. It was like when you meet the person you're going to marry or be with for the rest of your life. It's just like, you just know. And I knew when I worked with kids that this was where I wanted to be. This was what felt right. And, looking back, I used to babysit a lot when I was a kid. I really have an affinity for children. And when I worked in that pediatric rotation, not only was it a population of humanity that I was just normally attracted to from a nutrition standpoint, understanding and being so challenged by the diseases and conditions and medical challenges that children experience, many of which are the same that adults experience, but they are so much more magnified in children because children still have to grow. They still have to develop. They still need to learn and experience food. And so that I found fascinating and very challenging. So I often say to my friends or my dad, if I was explaining my job at the time, it'd be like, the reason I love pediatric nutrition is, kids, they get the same conditions that adults do. They get diabetes, they get cancer, they get liver disease, they get cardiac disease. And the big challenge with kids is how do we keep them growing, developing, socially, emotionally, physically, while they're dealing with that. And so to me, that is like the pinnacle of the challenge of pediatric nutrition for me. It's like, how do we normalize life? How do we normalize nutrition and food? How do we support children in their physical growth, even though they're dealing with this medical condition that they're dealing with? So I spent, after my internship, after I recognized that I wanted to be a pediatric dietitian, I was offered a job at Mass General. They had an opening on the pediatric floor, and I took it. I took it in a heartbeat. And I worked at Mass General for about 4.5 years. During that time, I got my master's degree at night in pediatric nutrition. I specialized in that area. And so I did, again, the full-time job during the day, and I went to night school. It took me, I can't remember how long it took me. I want to say it took me 3 years to get my master's completed, kind of in that part-time capacity. I learned a lot in that job. I worked on the adolescent floor. I worked on the general peds floor. I worked with kids with diabetes, cystic fibrosis, gastrointestinal diseases, eating disorders, all kinds, post-surgical kids. I worked with a lot of different kids, and I learned so much as a result of it. I then actually switched jobs and worked over at Children's Hospital Boston. They were in need of a nutrition support dietitian, so I made that transfer. And it was an upgrade in challenge. It was an upgrade in pay. It was just a new challenge on so many different levels. There was one other dietitian, Sharon Collier. She and I managed nutrition support. So all the intravenous nutrition that kids needed in that hospital. And there were quite a few kids, and most of the kids were intensive care unit kids. There were some kids that were on long-term intravenous nutrition that would be on long-term home TPN. But for the most part, I would say 75% of the kids that we managed were critically ill children. I managed the cardiac ICU ward. I managed the bone marrow transplant ward and covered, general pediatric floors as needed. Again, learned so much. In that job, it was my first real taste of research and assisting doctors, GI doctors, because I worked for the nutrition and GI department, assisting GI doctors in their research, in their nutrition and GI research. So helping them write and edit. It was my first opportunity to help co-edit a couple of chapters for a book, or co-write a couple of chapters for a textbook and edit a textbook as well. So I had a lot of experiences there that really grew sort of my expertise and my exposure to lots of different conditions and lots of different ways to provide nutrition to children. I also did my own study there. I had my own study in bone marrow transplant patients, and I actually won a grant from the American Society of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition, which is referred to as ASPEN. And that was very exciting. During my time at Children's Hospital, I had my first child, baby number 1, and I was doing that commute. I was the working mom, working full-time, trying to scurry back by 5 o'clock to pick up my daughter out of daycare, and that was stressful. And I won't go into all the details of the struggles that I had with my first child because I did have a lot of struggles. I talk about that in my TEDx talk, so if you've never listened to that, it's over on YouTube, and I'll include a link in the show notes. But, having that first child and moving from 7 years as a quote-unquote expert in pediatric nutrition, I would qualify that with, clinical pediatric nutrition. Having my own child changed the game. It was such an eye-opener and a humbling experience and a struggle. It was a big struggle for me. It really changed my perspective on pediatric nutrition, on child nutrition, and it informed pretty much my philosophy about child nutrition as I see it today. And that is that it's not just about food, it's about feeding and it's about child development and integrating those 3 areas in order to really, truly, fully nourish a child inside and out. And when I say inside and out, I mean physically, emotionally, socially, cognitively. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about fully nourishing a child. This episode is brought to you by The Nourished Child, the ultimate nutrition school for parents who want to raise good eaters. Kids change a lot. Their nutrition needs, eating habits, and food preferences do too. So much so, it can be hard to keep up. The Nourished Child helps parents get crystal clear on raising healthy kids who are good eaters. We've cracked the code on nourishing the whole child, whether you're raising a baby, a teen, or a child with health concerns. You'll find free resources, guides, tutorials, and programs to help you get the inside scoop on food and nutrients, positive food parenting, and building self-motivated, autonomous kids who enjoy all foods. The Nourished Child builds you up with nutrition and feeding know-how so you can confidently raise a healthy, happy child. Visit thenourishedchild.com today. I also got pregnant with my second baby when I was at Children's Hospital, and I realized right away that making that 45-minute commute twice a day with one child and being pregnant was probably not going to be working out very well for me. So I left Children's Hospital and I had a very brief stint at Metro West Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, as an outpatient dietitian. I unfortunately had a little bit of a difficult pregnancy, so I did not last long in that job. I had a lot of migraine headaches and blood pressure problems, so I resigned at about 5.5 months of pregnancy to take it easy for the rest of that pregnancy, get used to being a stay-at-home mom, and that's what I did. From that point on, for 9 years, I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband and I proceeded to have 2 more children, so we have 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, not unlike my family of origin, just in a different order. Our oldest 3 are girls and our youngest is a boy. And just briefly, if you don't know, 2 of my daughters live in New York City. They are employed adults, and my younger 2 children are still in college. What did I learn as a stay-at-home mom? Probably just as valuable, if not more valuable, to my education in pediatric nutrition was staying at home with 4 kids and feeding them. It was a real opportunity to be a mom and figure out things as the days rolled on, figure out what worked for my family, what felt right, what I knew in principle about pediatric nutrition and how I could apply it and practice it in my own home. I will tell you, feeding multiple children is no joke. It is not easy. I fully appreciate that. I hope you all understand that. I get it. I get how challenging it is to feed a family, to feed multiple children, to feed multiple personalities, to feed multiple body shapes and food preferences, all of that stuff. It is not easy. I relied heavily on structure. That's why I preach about structure. I preach about boundaries. I preach about guided choices because I lived it and it worked for me. And I know from the research, it is validated. It is a valid approach for children. We were a highly structured family. We were highly scheduled, not overscheduled, because overscheduled implies we were running around all over the place. We were not. I had 4 young children within 5 years, and we were at home a lot. In fact, if we socialized, people came to my house because it was too difficult for me to travel with 4 young children. So it was easier for me to just have people come to my house for play dates and social events than it was, for us to get out and go. And so I did a lot of entertaining during those years too. We had a lot of parties, a lot of family parties, a lot of kids coming over. We had a pool. I hired a swim instructor from the YMCA for 5 summers, and she came and taught a group of kids from the neighborhood and friends who would come over every morning and learn how to swim in my pool. So I was very involved in that community, very involved in life as a mom with lots of kids. What I learned, and I can tell you what I would like to share with you, is what worked for me and what did I do during those days of being a full-time mom with, 4 kids under age 5. What did I do in terms of my routines with food and feeding? Number one thing I always did, I preach it today. I probably haven't preached it as much as I used to, but fruit at every meal. I started this with my first child, fruit at every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was the one thing, food-wise, I was highly consistent about. Every time I made a meal, fruit was on the menu. And my kids, as a result, they love fruit. There's no problem eating fruit. I had one, my boy would just eat fruit till the cows came home, and I would let him. And he eventually, varied his diet over time. But fruit was always on the table, and it wasn't fancy fruit. It wasn't a big fancy fruit salad. It was a bowl of clementines, and I very much believe, you got to figure out how to peel a clementine. I'm not going to do that for you. My hands are full already. I can't do your clementine. You do your clementine. And so the kids learned. They learned how to feed themselves as they grew up. The second thing I did was role model. And I think that, when I look back on life, and I hope my children would say this, but I think I've been a good role model for them. And I don't want that to seem like I was a perfect eater or anything like that. I was not a perfect eater. I eat a variety of foods. I like all kinds of foods. And so I hopefully role modeled that to them, that adventurousness, that enjoyment of eating all kinds of foods, that balance. I am not a no-sugar girl, and I'm not a no-sugar dietitian. I am a sugar fits, so let's fit it in. And when we have it, let's enjoy it. And so I hope I have role modeled that for my kids too. I think I also was a good role model for physical activity, and a good role model for sleep habits and routines, and a good role model for being organized and structured and clean. And I feel like every little thing has an impact on kids, and role modeling I took seriously. I remember, and I might have told this story before on the podcast, but I remember, my husband's not a huge fan of vegetables. And I remember one night saying to him, you got to fake it. You've got to put the vegetables that I make that you don't like on your plate. They have to be on your plate at a minimum. But optimally, I want the kids to see you eat them. At least take one bite. And that was an early conversation, and that worked well. He did that. And so our kids were able to see both of us eating a variety of foods. Pressure to eat. We all have stories from our childhood. I didn't experience personally a lot of pressure myself to eat. I think my husband probably experienced pressure to eat as a child. I know my sister did. I watched it. She was a picky eater. And so my husband and I decided that we would not be putting a lot of pressure on our kids to eat. And some of that was informed by my early experience with my first daughter. Pressure didn't work. I knew instinctively, I knew it wouldn't work. I didn't feel good about using it. And after that experience, I just vowed not to be that kind of person that pressured my kids to take more bites or to try this or that or the other. I might suggest, try this. I think you would enjoy it. But if my child said no, that was the end of the conversation. The other thing I did that was hugely impactful for our family was introduce family-style meals. And I did that when my oldest was 9, when we were living in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it was a game changer for us. It really changed the dynamic, and we didn't have a bad dynamic, but it's easy to start going down when you got 4 kids and people are complaining and I want this and I don't like that. It can get chaotic at dinner time. And I think that for us, doing family style meals came at the right time for us because I could see that we were heading down the path of having more drama, more discord, less enjoyment at mealtime. And introducing family style meals changed that whole dynamic right away. And I've never looked back and I've never changed it. I serve family style when we have guests. I serve it to my kids when they bring their friends over. That's how I serve food. If you are interested in learning more about family style meals, I do have a workshop called Eat in Peace. You can go over to thenourishedchild.com and find that. I think it's under $40, maybe under $30. I can't remember. But it's a 2-hour workshop with lots of digital downloads that support the course. I think you'll like it. And then the last thing that I think I did well in terms of raising my family was the daily activity. Daily outdoor play. If we could get outside, we were outside. And we lived in Massachusetts. I remember my kids' preschool teacher, they had a rule at the preschool that if it was above 20 degrees, everybody suited up and went outside. And so I adopted that temperature for my own family at home as well. It was like, if we're above 20 degrees, we're putting on the boots, we're getting geared up, and we're going outside. And so I think that was a good thing for my kids. They never disliked going outside. They liked being outside. We used to take family walks every weekend through the woods. We did a lot of outdoor activities, and I think the kids benefited from that in many, many ways. What I would say that I was very routine oriented. We had a lot of routines, and my children thrived in that environment. I've watched other families and I've seen their children thrive in that environment. If there's chaos in a family, I oftentimes will recommend, let's tighten up structure. Let's get more routines on board, and let's make sure we communicate those routines with your children. And kids like it. Kids really like routines. They do well with those. After that 9-year stint, my son was 5 years old in 2007 and getting ready to start kindergarten, and I started to think about a private practice. I started to see that, with all 4 kids in school, my life would change radically. And so I started to think about opening my own business. I spent a year learning how to do a private practice, reading books, looking at the Better Business Bureau and the Small Business Association, and just trying to learn and understand what it meant to run a business. And then we moved. We left Fort Wayne and we moved to Nashville. My husband's job changed and we went to Nashville. My son started kindergarten and it was a full day kindergarten. And so I opened my private practice, and that was a learning curve. But it was a great learning curve. And the whole idea of knowing pediatric nutrition, but also marrying that with a business sense, that was a whole new challenge for me, a whole new learning curve, and I embraced it. I was ready. The timing was great. I was ready to get serious about it, ready to really devote a lot of time and energy to it, maximize the time that I did have available for my business. I would use that time and really started to cultivate a private practice in the Nashville area that served just children and their families. I also, during that time, I guess I started my private practice in 2008. And in 2009, blogs started to become really popular. I think they were popular before 2009, but in the nutrition field, they started to really take off. And I thought, well, heck, I'll give that a wing. And so I started my blog, and it was called Just the Right Bite, BYTE, back then. And it was fun. It was fun, and it filled the time when I had gaps in between clients, or if clients had to cancel and reschedule, it would create time for me to write. And so I started to write about what I was doing in my practice, different questions that parents were asking me, and I was writing down the answers in a blog post. It was a lot of fun. Over the course of a couple of years, the blog probably on some level, along with another dietitian who's my co-author of Fearless Feeding, all of that got noticed, and my co-author, Marianne, reached out to me. We started to have a friendly relationship and decided to collaborate on a book, which was called Fearless Feeding, How to Raise Healthy Eaters from High Chair to High School. And that was my first experience writing a book, my first experience working with another writer to write a book. And it was intense and amazing and quite an opportunity to download all those practical things I'd learned and used with my own kids and with my clients in private practice. And honestly, folks, after Fearless Feeding, things, over the next, when was Fearless Feeding first put out? 2013. So the next 8 years till now, this past 8 years has been unbelievable in terms of my career, my business, all the different things that have been happening. Fearless Feeding led to speaking. It's led to other books. It's led to consulting. And ultimately, it has led to where I am at right now, which is, podcast host of The Nourished Child, YouTube channel called The Nourished Child, website for parents called The Nourished Child. That's where I am today. I closed my private practice in May during the pandemic, and I've shifted to speaking, consulting, doing some professional mentoring for other dietitians, and running this separate website, The Nourished Child, which has the podcast and the articles and the workshops and mini trainings and classes and books and all of those things that I now, find myself doing on a weekly basis. But I will tell you, over the years, things have changed so much. What we practice as dietitians in pediatric nutrition is different today than what it was 20 years ago. Just look at infant nutrition. I've done some podcast episodes on that. Infant nutrition's changed dramatically in 20 years. And you know what? Other things in pediatric nutrition, child nutrition, will change. That's why you need to have your child nutritionists in your back pocket, folks, because things are always changing. We are learning so much about research. We're learning so much about what kids need, what they don't need. And it's a big, wide field, and it's a new field, which means that it will continue to change. I personally love the work that I do. I feel called to it. I feel like it's my purpose. Of course, I have a passion for childhood nutrition. I wouldn't do what I do for so long. It's been almost 30 years now. I wouldn't do it if I didn't have a passion for it, but it makes me feel purposeful. It makes me feel inspired. It makes me feel challenged. And I know that I don't know everything. And there's no possible way I could know everything. I'm just not that smart. I couldn't pack all that information into my head. But I'm encouraged by the fact that so many other people know a lot too. There's so many good resources out there from pediatric dietitians and registered dietitians who work with families. There's great researchers out there. I think that what I would say is that, I've learned a lot over 30 years. I've learned to take action, whether it be with my own kids, my private practice, my clients, my business. I'm action-oriented, and that has helped me a lot over the years, but I'm also flexible. Look at me. I am sitting in a closet doing this podcast. There is forced flexibility sometimes, flexibility when I don't want to be flexible, but I'm still trying to be as flexible and adaptable as I can be, and open to learn more and to learn new and to learn and appreciate others' perspectives and opinions. Nutrition seems like it should be so serious, and it is sometimes, but it's not. It should be silly and fun and enjoyable, and that's what I hope you are bringing to your children and your families, and I hope in some way, shape, or form I've inspired that along the way. I hope I have. And I also know that, you have an incredibly important job as a parent, and as I sit, I'm on the fence right now. 2 of mine are over on the other side. They're young adults. I've done my job with them. I've raised them. They're on their own. And I've got 2 that are almost ready to be over that fence. And what I can tell you is that what I did every day with food and with feeding and understanding where my kids were at, I think had a huge impact on them, a huge impact on who they are today. And so I just want to encourage you to keep going and to keep tuned into your instinct, your gut instinct, that instinct that might say to you, oh, I shouldn't do that, or this might not be good to do, or I should keep doing this. This is successful. I can see it's obviously something that's working. Listen to your gut. You know a lot as a parent. You know a lot for yourself, and you know a lot about your kids. But also seek knowledge, because things change and there's always something new on the horizon. I hope that I can support you in that area. You can reach out. If you have ideas for the podcast, let me know what you want to hear about. If you have ideas for a class or a course, I know some of you have reached out and said, we want to learn more about ARFID. I am working on a resource for you in that area. But I'm here as a servant to provide resources to you. While I don't do one-on-one counseling anymore, I do try to bring that element of counseling into the classes and the trainings that I create, into the books that I write. I can't get away from it, really. It's kind of a natural thing for me, but I hope that feels good to you. I hope that you enjoyed this show from my little closet in my little apartment in my brand new city. And thanks for listening. Thanks for being flexible, that this is not my typical show on the Nourished Child, but this has not been a typical year, and I'm just being flexible. With that, I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you in a couple. Give that child in your life today a loving squeeze. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Nourished Child. Now here's what I want you to do next. If you haven't grabbed my free checklist, How to Nourish a Child, head over to www.thenourishedchild.com and click on the show notes for this episode. This checklist is designed to give you a clear path and the steps you need to take to raise a nourished child inside and out. Also, if you love the show, I'd love for you to rate and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Not only will this give the Nourished Child a boost, it will also help other parents find it. Now, let's wrap this up. I'm Jill Castle, and until next time, give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.